What would you do if the man who just married your daughter tried to steal the very house you built with your own hands? That isn't a question pulled from some true crime documentary. It's my life. It's a story of family betrayal, of inheritance, scams of elder fraud, so cold-blooded, it makes you wonder how well you really know the people sitting at your own dinner table. And tonight I'm here to tell you how Edward Harris, 68 years old, uncovered a plot that nearly stripped me of my home, my dignity, and everything I had built. 2 days. That's all it took. Just 2 days after the wedding of my daughter Emily Harris, while the flowers were still wilting on the tables and the taste of champagne still lingered in my mouth, my new son-in-law Nathan Cole showed up at my door with a smug smile and a man I didn't recognize. A notary. A man with a leather briefcase and a pen ready to erase decades of my life. Nathan leaned in, his voice dripping with confidence. "We just sold this house. You're moving to a retirement home." Imagine hearing that. Imagine sitting across from someone who calls you dad in public, but looks at you as nothing more than a valuable asset. He wasn't asking, he was declaring. To him, I wasn't a father, I wasn't a man. I was just an obstacle, a signature to be forged, a problem to be solved. That was his mistake. I stayed calm, my voice steady, my eyes fixed on his, and I said words I knew would cut through the performance. "Let's stop by the police station first. They're very interested in what I sent them about you." For a moment I saw it, the flicker behind his eyes, the mask slipping, the predator realizing his prey wasn't as weak as he thought. You see, this story isn't just about a greedy son-in-law. It's about a system of dark family secrets, about how predators target the elderly with inheritance scams and real estate fraud. It's about how easily love can be twisted into leverage and how family betrayal can hurt deeper than any stranger's crime. But it's also about revenge, not the kind with fists or fury, but the kind built with patience, with evidence, with a plan. That night, sitting in the Golden Oaks restaurant while diners laughed and clinked glasses around us, I realized my life had just split in two. Before, I was a father who believed in family unity. After, I was a man preparing for war. And in this war, I wasn't just fighting for bricks and wood. I was fighting for every memory Diane and I had built in those walls, for every step Emily had taken as a child across those floors, for the dignity of a life that could not and would not be signed away. This is not just my story, it's a warning, because what happened to me could happen to anyone. And if you think age makes us weak, let me tell you, age gives us something far more dangerous. It gives us experience. It gives us resolve. And in the end, it gives us the ability to turn betrayal into justice. The wedding had barely ended. The flowers were still sitting in glass vases, their petals curling at the edges, and the faint echo of laughter still clung to the walls of the reception hall in my memory. I could still see Emily's face lit up by candlelight, her dress flowing as the string quartet played. I had written a check for $15,000 to make sure she had the day she had always dreamed of. That money was not just a number on paper. It was hours of overtime, years of careful saving, decades of responsibility compressed into one gesture. It was my way of telling her, your happiness is worth everything I can give. Yet only 2 days later, that same joy turned to ash in my mouth. I had built my home 20 years earlier with my own hands. Every nail I hammered, every wall I painted, every repair I did myself. It was more than a house. It was the physical proof of my life's work, the place where Diane and I raised Emily, where birthdays and Christmases and Sunday dinners had turned four walls into something sacred. But to Nathan Cole, my brand new son-in-law, it was nothing more than a valuable asset. He didn't see the memories. He didn't see the history. He saw dollar signs and leverage. 2 days after the vows, he stood in front of me, his smile rehearsed, his words sharpened. "It's not practical for you to live alone in such a big place," he said, as if he were a financial advisor, not a son-in-law. He tried to make it sound reasonable, almost caring, but beneath the surface I could hear the calculation. He wasn't offering me help. He was announcing a plan. My home, the heart of my family, was just a move in his game. I thought back to the night of the reception. Nathan had shaken my hand firmly, called me dad, in front of the guests, and toasted to new beginnings. He looked every bit the charming husband, the kind of man you'd want your daughter to marry. But now, as he talked about retirement homes and practicality, I realized that handshake had been nothing but theater. He had been rehearsing for this moment, waiting for the ink on the marriage certificate to dry so he could strike. What cut the deepest was not the scheme itself, but the betrayal hidden inside it. I had welcomed him into my family. I had trusted that Emily, after years of heartbreak, had finally found someone who cared for her. I had opened my wallet, my home, and my heart, and in return he looked me in the eye and told me without shame that the life I had built was over, that I should step aside so he and Emily could take over what was mine. The bitterness stung harder because Emily sat between us, her wedding ring still shining, her face torn with confusion. She whispered, "Dad, please, let's not fight." She didn't see it yet, the predator behind the smile. To her, it was just tension between two men. To me, it was a declaration of war. In that moment, I understood the cruelty of Nathan's plan. He had chosen to move quickly to strike while the emotions of the wedding still lingered. He thought I would be softened by joy, blinded by the image of my daughter's happiness. But instead, his timing revealed his true nature. The flowers from the reception were still on the table, and already he was trying to uproot me from the very soil I had planted my life in. I had sacrificed for Emily. I had poured money, sweat, and years into giving her stability. Yet here was the man she had married using her love as a weapon against me. That is the essence of family betrayal, not the stranger who cheats you, but the one who smiles at your table while planning to take everything from you. And as I looked at Nathan's grin, confident and unshakable, I realized he believed he had already won. But he underestimated me. The Golden Oaks was the kind of restaurant people chose for celebrations. Soft jazz in the background, warm candlelight, waiters gliding between tables with quiet precision. Couples leaned close, whispering, laughing, raising glasses of wine. To anyone looking from the outside, our table was no different. A newly married couple and the father of the bride sharing dinner, smiling politely, talking about the future. But beneath the surface, tension wrapped around my chest like a vice. Nathan sat across from me, his posture relaxed, his hand resting lightly on Emily's. His smile was charming, almost convincing, the kind that had fooled many before me. He swirled the wine in his glass, the dim light catching on the liquid as he spoke in a voice meant for persuasion rather than conversation. Just think about it, Edward. Grandchildren playing in those rooms, laughter filling the halls again. Isn't that what you'd want? Isn't that what Diane would have wanted? For a moment, I nearly choked on my breath. He dared to invoke Diane's name, my wife, the woman whose memory still warmed every corner of that house, as if her spirit could be enlisted to support his scheme. My jaw tightened, but I said nothing. I watched him carefully, listening, not to his words, but to the greed hidden behind them. Emily sat between us, her wedding ring catching the glow of the candlelight. She leaned forward, her voice soft, almost pleading. "Dad, please don't fight. It's supposed to be a happy day." She wanted to believe this was just a misunderstanding, a small conflict between two stubborn men. But I could see the flicker in her eyes, the way her fingers trembled as she touched her napkin. She sensed it too, that Nathan's interest in the house was not rooted in love, but in hunger. I looked at her and saw my daughter, the little girl who once played with crayons in that very living room, Nathan now called valuable. I remembered holding her hand on her first day of school, Diane's voice telling her to be brave. And now here she was, torn between loyalty to her father and loyalty to the man she had just promised her life to. That was the cruelty of it. Nathan knew she would try to keep peace. He counted on it. The waiter appeared, refilling glasses with the kind of invisibility only professionals possessed. Around us, laughter erupted from a nearby table as someone told a joke. But at our table, each word felt like a weapon. Nathan leaned in, his smile never fading. "Edward, it's not practical. At your age, wouldn't you be more comfortable with something smaller, more manageable? We could take such good care of the house, keep it in the family. Think about it, a young couple starting their life properly." The words dripped with charm, but the message was poison. He wasn't asking. He was framing my own home as an inconvenience, a burden. And the way he looked at Emily when he said young couple told me exactly what he meant. He wanted her loyalty to tip the scales, to make me surrender without a fight. Emily's voice cracked slightly as she whispered, "Nathan, maybe we shouldn't," but he squeezed her hand, silencing her. She looked down, her eyes glistening, her body caught in the middle of a storm she couldn't control. That was the moment I understood this wasn't just about property. This was about control. Nathan was using charm as a weapon, Emily as a shield, and the illusion of family harmony as a stage set. He wanted me to feel outnumbered, isolated, outdated. He wanted me to doubt myself, but what he didn't realize was that I had already seen behind the mask. I sat back in my chair, my fork resting on the plate, the taste of cake turning bitter in my mouth. To the other diners, I was just another old man having dinner with his family. But in my mind, I was already preparing for war. When I returned home from that suffocating dinner at Golden Oaks, the silence of my house wrapped around me like a shroud. The laughter of other diners still rang faintly in my ears, a cruel reminder of how different their world was from mine. I walked into my study, the room that had always been my refuge, a place of books, papers, and the smell of polished wood. On the desk sat a single photograph in a worn silver frame. Diane Harris, my wife, my partner, my compass through life. Her smile in that picture had carried me through the darkest nights, and now it stared back at me with a question I couldn't answer. I sank into the leather chair, its creak familiar, almost comforting. My hands, roughened by years of work, rested on the arms of the chair, and I let the memories wash over me. I thought about the day we first bought this plot of land. Diane had walked through the half-built frame of this house with her hands outstretched as if she could already touch the walls, already hear the echoes of Emily's laughter. We didn't have much money, but we had determination. Every weekend I worked on this house, hammer in hand, sweat dripping into the wood. Each corner bore the mark of my labor, and each room carried Diane's vision of home. I remembered the first family dinner we had after moving in. The table was small, the dishes modest, but Diane had lit candles and played soft music on the old radio. Emily was just a child, then chasing shadows across the floor, her tiny footsteps filling the room with a joy that money could never buy. That house was never just lumber and brick. It was the vessel of our lives. Birthdays, Christmas mornings, quiet evenings with Diane reading beside me, all of it soaked into the walls like perfume that never fades. Now I sat there decades later being told that this sacred space was practical real estate, a valuable asset, something to be managed and transferred like a bank account. And worse, those words came not from a stranger, but from the man my daughter had chosen to call her husband. My heart ached, not just with anger, but with sorrow. How did it come to this? How could Emily's husband look at the place where she took her first steps and see only square footage and market value? How could he erase Diane's laughter, Emily's childhood, and my years of sacrifice with the stroke of a pen? I leaned forward, staring at Diane's photograph. She would have known what to say. She always had a way of seeing through people, of reading motives before they revealed themselves. She used to tell me, trust but verify, Edward. People show you who they are if you pay attention. And she was right. I had been too eager to believe in Nathan's charm, too grateful that Emily seemed happy, too blind to the possibility that this so-called family man was a predator in disguise. The study felt smaller that night, the shadows heavier. I opened my journal, the one Diane had given me when I retired, and I wrote down every detail, the smugness in Nathan's tone, the way Emily's eyes darted nervously, the way he spoke of grandchildren as bargaining chips. Each word steadied me, each line transformed pain into clarity. If Nathan saw my house as a transaction, then I would see him as a problem to be solved. I closed the journal and whispered to Diane's photograph. He thinks he's clever, but he doesn't know me. He doesn't know what I've survived. This house isn't just walls, it's us. And no one takes that from me. It was Frank Douglas who first pulled me aside, his voice low and steady, the way only a former cop could manage. He had lived next door to me for nearly 15 years, the kind of neighbor who waved from his porch, but rarely pried into personal matters. That day, however, his face was tight, his eyes sharp. Edward, he said, I saw something you need to know about. Yesterday afternoon, your son-in-law brought a man to your house. Suit, briefcase, measuring tape. They were walking the property line taking pictures. It looked official. Too official. My stomach dropped. The air around me seemed to thicken as his words sank in. Frank knew what he was talking about. He had spent decades on the force. His instincts weren't the kind to raise false alarms. He described how the man had jotted notes in a leather-bound book, how Nathan had opened the side gate with the ease of someone who already believed the place belonged to him. The image burned in my mind, two men strolling casually across my backyard, treating my home like a commodity up for auction. That night, when the house was quiet and Emily and Nathan were upstairs, I sat down at my computer. My fingers hovered over the mouse, and with a sense of dread, I opened the browser history. What I found confirmed everything Frank had said. Search after search glared back at me: property appraisers near me, quick house sale companies, elderly homeowner assistance programs. There were even pages bookmarked about power of attorney and real estate transfers for seniors. Each click was like a blade carving away at my trust. Nathan hadn't just been thinking about the house, he had been planning this for weeks, maybe months. I copied every link, printed every page, and tucked them into a folder. Diane's voice echoed in my mind: trust but verify. Well, now I had verification, but I needed more. I needed professional guidance, someone who knew how predators like Nathan operated. That's when I picked up the phone and called Robert Hayes, the lawyer who had handled Diane's estate after she passed. He was a man of discretion, the kind of attorney who measured every word. When I explained what I had discovered, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Robert spoke. "Edward, I need you to listen carefully. Nathan Cole isn't new to this. He's been on my radar before. He has a pattern marrying into families, targeting widowed fathers, pushing property transfers under the guise of family planning. I've seen his name connected to at least 3 complaints, but none of them had enough evidence to stick." My chest tightened. Hearing those words from Robert was like having the ground shift beneath me. Nathan wasn't just greedy, he was calculated, practiced, almost professional. And Emily, my daughter, was just his latest doorway into another scheme. Robert's advice was simple but firm: document everything. Don't confront him yet. Don't. Gather evidence, keep a paper trail, and let me guide you. The worst mistake you can make is tipping him off before we're ready. So I did exactly that. I pulled out the leather-bound journal Diane had given me years ago and began to write. Every conversation, every suspicious glance, every question Nathan had asked about the heating system or the property taxes, I wrote it all down. Each entry became a piece of the puzzle, transforming my fear into determination. By the time I closed the journal that night, I no longer felt like a victim waiting to be pushed out of his home. I felt like a man preparing for battle. Nathan thought he was orchestrating a quiet theft, but what he didn't know was that I was already building a case strong enough to destroy his plan before it ever saw daylight. The day of reckoning came faster than I expected. Detective Karen Blake had been methodical, her voice steady as she explained the plan. Surveillance equipment had been installed: microphones hidden in picture frames, tiny cameras tucked into corners of my living room. I felt like my own house had been transformed into a stage, and I was both actor and bait. She told me to remain calm, to play my part, to let Nathan believe he was winning. "Your job," she said, "is to let him talk. The more he says, the deeper he digs his own grave." When the knock finally came, my heart pounded in my chest, but my face betrayed nothing. I opened the door to find Nathan standing there, his smile wide, his suit-pressed confidence radiating from every pore. Beside him stood Martin Shaw, the so-called notary, carrying a leather briefcase that might as well have been filled with weapons. They stepped inside without hesitation, as though they already owned the place. Nathan's eyes swept the room with satisfaction before settling on me. "Edward," he said smoothly, "we've come to finalize everything." They sat at my coffee table, spreading out papers with dramatic flair. Stamped seals, official-looking signatures, every detail crafted to fool an unsuspecting man. Nathan pushed the documents toward me, his tone almost paternal. "It's all arranged. You've sold the house. You'll be moving to a retirement community, comfortable, safe, everything taken care of. This is the best thing for everyone." I picked up the papers, my hands deliberately trembling, my eyes scanning the forged signatures that bore my name. I let silence hang in the room, let Nathan's arrogance swell. Martin Shaw adjusted his tie and leaned forward, his voice dripping with false authority. "Mr. Harris, these documents are legally binding. Everything has been notarized. All that remains is your cooperation." I set the papers down, slowly meeting Nathan's eyes. For a brief moment, I let my expression reflect defeat, confusion, the image of an old man out of his depth. Nathan's grin widened. He thought he had me. That was when I leaned back, folded my hands, and said with deliberate calm, "Perhaps we should visit the police station. They're very interested in your activities in Phoenix and Denver." The words sliced through the room like glass. Nathan's smile vanished, replaced by a flash of panic. His skin paled. His eyes darted to Martin, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "What are you talking about?" Nathan demanded, his voice cracking for the first time since I had met him. I didn't flinch. I held his gaze steady and cold. You've done this before, Nathan. Different cities, different families. Did you really think no one was watching? The silence that followed was deafening. Then in an instant, the front door burst open. Detective Karen Blake and two uniformed officers stormed into the room, their badges gleaming under the living room light. Nathan Cole, Martin Shaw, you're under arrest for fraud, forgery, and elder abuse, Blake announced, her voice firm, commanding. Nathan shot to his feet, papers scattering across the floor. This is a misunderstanding, he shouted, desperation dripping from every syllable. Martin froze his briefcase, still open, the notary stamp in plain view, a damning piece of evidence. The officers moved swiftly, pinning Nathan's arms, pulling Martin back from the table. I remained seated, watching the chaos unfold with a sense of grim satisfaction. For weeks I had carried the weight of suspicion, betrayal, and doubt. Now finally I had proof, not just for myself, but for the world. As Nathan was led toward the door, he turned his head, his eyes locking onto mine. Gone was the smug confidence, replaced by rage and something darker, a promise. This isn't over, he hissed. But to me it was already over. Detective Blake collected the forged documents, carefully, her gloved hands placing them into an evidence bag. She gave me a nod, a silent acknowledgement that the trap had worked. My house, my sanctuary, had become the stage for Nathan's downfall, and I had played my part to perfection. For the first time in weeks, I breathed deeply, the air in my home finally feeling clean again. The predator had been unmasked, and the truth was now undeniable. News travels faster than fire in a small community. By the next morning, the story was everywhere. Neighbors gathered in clusters at the end of driveways, whispering over fences, their voices carrying fragments of my name, Nathan's name, and words like fraud and elder abuse. What had once been a quiet street lined with trim lawns and polite smiles had turned into a stage where everyone suddenly had a role, some as silent witnesses, others as amateur judges, all with their eyes on me. I remember stepping onto my porch that morning, the air crisp, the sun rising, as though nothing had changed, yet everything had. Frank Douglas stood in his yard with his arms folded, his expression unreadable, though I caught the faintest nod of respect. Across the street, Mrs. Kendall, who had baked pies for Emily's birthdays when she was little, shook her head and muttered something I couldn't hear. A few neighbors looked at me with pity, as if I were fragile, a victim, stripped of dignity. But there were others, men who had built their homes, women who had raised families alone, who looked at me with something stronger, admiration. They understood what it meant to fight back when you were supposed to go quietly. Nathan's arrest made headlines in the local paper. His mugshot stared back at me from the front page, a face drained of charm, stripped of its mask. The charges were clear: real estate fraud, forgery, elder abuse. Words that once belonged to stories about strangers now stamped themselves onto my own life. Each headline was a reminder that betrayal had not stayed hidden at my dinner table. It had exploded into the world for everyone to see. Emily came to see me a week later, her eyes red, her body smaller somehow, as if the weight of betrayal had pressed her down. She sat at the same kitchen table where she once did homework as a girl, where Diane used to serve pancakes on Sunday mornings. She couldn't look at me at first, her hands twisting the ring on her finger. Finally, she whispered, "Dad, I'm so sorry. I didn't see him for what he was. I thought—" Her voice broke, and the tears spilled. I reached across the table and held her hand. "Emily, you wanted to believe in love. That's not a mistake. That's hope. He betrayed you too, not just me." It wasn't long before she filed for divorce, her lawyer explaining that the marriage, so new and yet already poisoned, could be dissolved quickly. Watching her walk into the courthouse alone, strong, despite the pain, reminded me of Diane's resilience. Emily was wounded, yes, but she was not broken. She had stepped out of Nathan's shadow before it consumed her. Still, the shame lingered. At the grocery store, people stared longer than they should have. At church, whispers followed us down the aisle. Some saw me as a victim, others as a fool who let a predator through the front door. Yet beneath it all, there was something undeniable: respect. Not for what had happened, but for how it had ended. I hadn't surrendered my house. I hadn't signed away my life. I had fought, and the truth had prevailed. In the evenings, when the street grew quiet again, I would sit by the window with a cup of coffee and watch the lights in the other houses. I wondered how many of those families carried their own secrets, how many were one betrayal away from collapse. But I also knew that my story had become more than gossip. It was a warning, a reminder that predators don't always wear masks of strangers. Sometimes they walk into your family wearing a tuxedo and a wedding ring. I never spoke to Nathan again after the night he was arrested. There were no prison visits, no phone calls, no letters exchanged through lawyers. The line between us had been cut cleanly, as though it had never existed, and I felt no desire to mend it. Some people asked me if I wanted closure, if I would face him one last time, to ask why he had chosen betrayal over family. But the truth is, I already knew the answer. His why didn't matter. What mattered was that I was still here standing unbroken. For weeks I carried the weight of silence like a stone in my chest. There was no shouting match, no final argument, no chance to demand an apology. And maybe that was for the best. What could Nathan possibly say that would change the reality of what he had done? He had looked at me, at Emily, at this home Diane and I built, and seen only opportunity. That choice spoke louder than any words ever could. Instead, I found my own form of reconciliation, not with him, but with myself. I stood in my study one evening, staring at Diane's photograph, the journal of notes and evidence lying closed on the desk. My voice, steady and low, broke the quiet. I was never weak. I was never a burden. I was always my own man. Those words weren't just spoken for me. They were a declaration, a message hurled across the chasm Nathan had created. He thought I was vulnerable, that my age and my solitude made me an easy mark. He mistook kindness for weakness and love for blindness. But I had proven him wrong. I was not the old man he could swindle into a corner. I was the father who had survived loss, the builder who had created a home from nothing, the man who stood his ground when the predator came knocking. Saying those words out loud was liberating. It was as if I had pulled the last dagger from my back and thrown it away. They were not just a rejection of Nathan's view of me, but a reaffirmation of who I had always been. Independent, resilient, my own man. Neighbors sometimes asked if I regretted how things had ended, if I wished I had handled it differently. I told them no. Regret belongs to those who give up, and I had not given up. Nathan had wanted me erased, tucked away in a retirement home, forgotten. Instead, I had written my own ending, one where his lies collapsed and the truth stood tall. I knew he would sit in his cell replaying the moment I looked him in the eye and exposed his past. I knew my words still echoed in his head louder than any gavel or prison door. He wanted to make me feel small, diminished by age. But in the end, it was Nathan who was reduced to nothing more than a number in the prison system, while I remained exactly what I had always been myself. In the quiet hours of night, when the house settled around me and the memories of Diane filled the walls, I whispered the words again. Not out of anger, not out of spite, but as a truth carved into stone. I was never weak. I was never a burden. I was always my own man. And with that, the last piece of his power over me vanished forever. The house was quiet again, the way it used to be before the storm. For the first time in weeks, I didn't hear footsteps that weren't mine, or voices plotting in hushed tones. The walls seemed to exhale, as though they too had been holding their breath, waiting to see if they would still belong to me. I carried a fresh cup of coffee into the living room, its warmth seeping into my hands, grounding me in the present. Morning light poured through the window, soft and golden, touching the photographs on the mantel. Emily as a child in her school uniform, Diane smiling with her arms wrapped around both of us. That light felt like a blessing, a reminder that the darkness Nathan had tried to cast over my life could not last forever. The house was mine again, not just legally, not just on paper, but in spirit. It had survived betrayal just as I had. I took a slow sip and let the bitterness rest on my tongue. Coffee, not whiskey. Strength, not poison. Every detail around me carried meaning. Now the chair Diane used to sit in, the creak of the floorboards, even the silence of the rooms. They weren't empty. They were full of memory, of dignity, of proof that I was not defeated. Yes, I had lost my trust in a man who once dared to call me dad. Yes, Emily carried scars of her own, the pain of realizing her marriage was built on lies. But through it all, I had protected what mattered most: my home, my history, my name, and above all, my dignity. As I set the mug down, I whispered words that will never leave me. Family betrayal destroys trust, but revenge and the truth restores dignity. That is my story. But now I want to ask you, what would you have done in my place? Would you have fought or surrendered? Have you ever seen betrayal wear the face of family? Share your thoughts in the comments because these stories don't just belong to me, they belong to all of us. If this story spoke to you, don't just scroll past. Save this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss the next chapter. Because betrayal may break families, but together by telling these truths, we take our dignity back.